I'll always blame myself."
She put a hand to her throat.
"Mr. Archer was so alive yesterday afternoon. So solid and hearty and—"
"Stop it," Spade commanded. He knew what he was doing. They're the chances we take.
Was he married?"
"Yes, with 10,000 insurance, no children, and a wife who didn't like him."
"Oh, please don't,"
she whispered. Spade shrugged again. "That's the way it was." He glanced at his watch and moved from his chair to the settee beside her. "There's no time for worrying about that now." His voice was pleasant, but firm. "Out there, a flock of policemen and assistant district attorneys and reporters are running around with their noses to the ground. What do you want to do?"
"I want you to save me from it all," she replied in a thin, tremulous voice. She put a timid hand on his sleeve. "Mr. Spade, do they know about me?"
Not yet. I wanted to see you first."
What would they think if they knew about the way I came to you, with those lies?"
"It would make them suspicious. That's why I've been stalling them till I could see you. I thought maybe we wouldn't have to let them know all of it. We ought to be able to fake a story that will rock them to sleep if necessary."
"You don't think I had anything to do with the murders, do you?"
Spade grinned at her and said, "I forgot to ask you that. Did you?"
"No."
"Well, that's good. Now, what are we going to tell the police?" She squirmed on her end of the settee, and her eyes wavered between heavy lashes, as if trying and failing to free their gaze from his. She seemed smaller, and very young and oppressed.
"Must they know about me at all?" she asked. "I think I'd rather die than that, Mr. Spade. I can't explain now, but can't you somehow manage so that you can shield me from them, so I won't have to answer their questions? I don't think I could stand being questioned now. I think I would rather die. Can't you, Mr. Spade?"
"Maybe," he said. "But I'll have to know what it's all about." She went down on her knees at his knees. She held her face up to him. Her face was wan, taut, and fearful, over tight-clasped hands.
"I haven't lived a good life," she cried. "I've been bad, worse than you could know. But I'm not all bad. Look at me, Mr. Spade. You know I'm not all bad, don't you? You can see that, can't you? Then can't you trust me a little? Oh, I'm so alone and afraid, and I've got nobody to help me if you won't help me. I know I've no right to ask you to trust me if I won't trust you. I do trust you, but I can't tell you. I can't tell you now. Later I will, when I can. I'm afraid, Mr. Spade. I'm afraid of trusting you. I don't mean that. I do trust you, but I trusted Floyd, and I've nobody else. Nobody else, Mr. Spade. You can help me. You've said you can help me. If I hadn't believed you could save me, I would have run away today instead of sending for you. If I thought anybody else could save me, would I be down on my knees like this? I know this isn't fair of me, but be generous, Mr. Spade. Don't ask me to be fair. You're strong. You're resourceful. You're brave. You can spare me some of that strength and resourcefulness and courage, surely. Help me, Mr. Spade. Help me, because I need help so badly, and because if you don't, where will I find anyone who can, no matter how willing? Help me. I've no right to ask you to help me blindly, but I do ask you. Be generous, Mr. Spade. You can help me. Help me.
Spade, who had held his breath through much of this speech, now emptied his lungs with a long, sighing exhalation between pursed lips, and said, "You won't need much of anybody's help. You're good. You're very good. It's chiefly your eyes, I think, and that throb you get into your voice when you say things like, 'Be generous, Mr. Spade.'" She jumped up on her feet. Her face crimsoned painfully, but she held her head erect and she looked Spade straight in the eyes. "I deserve that," she said. "I deserve it, but I did want your help so much. I do want it and need it so much. And the lie was in the way I said it, not at all in what I said." She turned away, no longer holding herself erect.
It is my own fault that you can't believe me now."
Spade's face reddened, and he looked down at the floor, muttering, "Now you're dangerous." Bridget O'Shaughnessy went to the table and picked up his hat. She came back and stood in front of him, holding the hat, not offering it to him, but holding it for him to take if he wished. Her face was white and thin. Spade looked at his hat and asked, "What happened last night?"
"Floyd came to the hotel at 9 o'clock, and we went out for a walk. I suggested that so Mr. Archer could see him. We stopped at a restaurant in Geary Street, I think it was, for supper and to dance, and came back to the hotel at about 12:30. Floyd left me at the door, and I stood inside and watched Mr. Archer follow him down the street on the other side."
Down? You mean towards Market Street?
"Yes."
"Do you know what they'd be doing in the neighborhood of Bush and Stockton, where Archer was shot?"
"Isn't that near where Floyd lived?"
"No. It would be nearly a dozen blocks out of his way if he was going from your hotel to his." "Well, what did you do after they had gone?"
"I went to bed, and this morning when I went out for breakfast I saw the headlines in the papers and read about... you know. Then I went up to Union Square where I'd seen automobiles for hire and got one and went to the hotel for my luggage. After I found my room had been searched yesterday, I knew I would have to move, and I had found this place yesterday afternoon. So I came up here and then telephoned your office."
"Your room at the St. Mark was searched?" he asked.
"Yes, while I was at your office."
She bit her lip.
"I didn't mean to tell you that."
"That means I'm not supposed to question you about it." She nodded shyly. He frowned. She moved his hat a little in her hands. He laughed impatiently and said, "Stop waving the hat in my face. Haven't I offered to do what I can?" She smiled contritely, returned the hat to the table, and sat beside him on the settee again. He said, "I've got nothing against trusting you blindly, except that I won't be able to do you much good if I haven't some idea of what it's all about. For instance, I've got to have some sort of a line on your Floyd Thursby."
"I met him in the Orient."
She spoke slowly, looking down at a pointed finger tracing 8s on the settee between them.
"We came here from Hong Kong last week. He had promised to help me. He took advantage of my helplessness and dependence on him to betray me."
"Betray you how?" She shook her head and said nothing. Spade, frowning with impatience, asked, "Why did you want him shadowed?"
"I wanted to learn how far he had gone. He wouldn't even let me know where he was staying. I wanted to find out what he was doing, whom he was meeting, things like that."
"Did he kill Archer?" She looked up at him, surprised.
"Yes, certainly," she said.
"He had a Luger and a shoulder holster. Archer wasn't shot with a Luger."
"He had a revolver in his overcoat pocket," she said.
"You saw it?"
"Oh, I've seen it often. I know he always carries one there. I didn't see it last night, but I know he never wears an overcoat without it."
"Why all the guns?"
"He lived by them. There was a story in Hong Kong that he had come out there to the Orient as a bodyguard to a gambler who had to leave the States, and that the gambler had since disappeared. They said Floyd knew about his disappearance. I don't know. I do know that he always went heavily armed, and that he never went to sleep without covering the floor around his bed with crumpled newspaper so nobody could come silently into his room."
"You picked a nice sort of playmate."
"Only that sort could have helped me," she said simply. "If he had been loyal."
"Yes. If." Spade pinched his lower lip between finger and thumb and looked gloomily at her. The vertical creases over his nose deepened, drawing his brows together. "How bad a hole are you actually in?"
"As bad," she said, "as could be."
"Physical danger?"
"I'm not heroic. I don't think there's anything worse than death."
"Then it's that."
"It's that as surely as we're sitting here."
She shivered.
"Unless you help me."
He took his fingers away from his mouth and ran them through his hair. "I'm not God," he said irritably. "I can't work miracles out of thin air." He looked at his watch. "The day's going and you're giving me nothing to work with. Who killed Thursby?" She put a crumpled handkerchief to her mouth and said,
"I don't know."
Through it. "Your enemies or his?"
"I don't know. His, I hope, but I'm afraid. I don't know.
How was he supposed to be helping you? Why did you bring him here from Hong Kong? She looked at him with frightened eyes and shook her head in silence. Her face was haggard and pitifully stubborn. Spade stood up, thrust his hands into the pockets of his jacket, and scowled down at her. "This is hopeless," he said savagely. "I can't do anything for you. I don't know what you want done. I don't even know if you know what you want." She hung her head and wept. He made a growling animal noise in his throat and went to the table for his hat.
"You won't,"
she begged in a small, choked voice, not looking up.
"Go to the police?"
Go to them!" he exclaimed, his voice loud with rage. "They've been running me ragged since 4 o'clock this morning. I've made myself God knows how much trouble standing them off. For what? For some crazy notion that I can help you. I can't. I won't try." He pulled his hat on his head and pulled it down tight. "Go to them. All I've got to do is stand still and they'll be swarming all over me. I'll tell them what I know and you'll have to take your chances." She rose from the settee and held herself straight in front of him, though her knees were trembling, and she held her white, panic-stricken face up high, though she couldn't hold the twitching muscles of mouth and chin still. She said, "You've been patient. You've tried to help me. It is hopeless and useless, I suppose." She stretched out her right hand. "I thank you for what you have done. I'll have to take my chances."
End of Disc 1.